So you mentioned that culture, and I think it kind of boils down to the culture. That the culture of a company could either make or break a company, and it stems from the top. And I definitely do agree with that because, if you're an employee, working for a company or a manager, there's only so much say that you have or that you can express before you're more or less looked at as like the odd man out. And I'm speaking from personal experience. And I want to talk about culture because I don't know if not many people know this, but I did work for your company at a point, and I'll tell you, still till today is one of the best cultures that I've ever been a part of. And I've been part of companies that I've left because the culture was just terrible. Like, it was just toxic. Um, and Paradigm had such a unique culture that I can't even put it into words. You came in there and you just felt like everybody, and it seems kind of cliche, but like we were all a family. And when you got in there and you needed help, it wasn't like you would look down upon. It's like, all right, let's see what we can do. And it almost seemed like everybody cohesively was working towards one goal. And
Well,
that's very tough to find in companies today.
yeah. And you know what, Manny, I'll tell you, had you worked for me maybe 6 or 7 years beforehand, you wouldn't have seen that. Because I'll be the first one to tell you that, the reason everybody walked out one day is because we had a terrible culture. Because I had come from that police work environment where everything was very top down, do it because I said so. Not necessarily a nurturing or trusting environment, and a very rigid top-down structure. And as much as I didn't like that, and that was one of the reasons why I left, it was really the only example of management I had ever seen. And that's what we fall back on, and, there's an old saying, sometimes you become the thing that you hate the most. And I found out that all of a sudden I was acting like the managers that I despised. It took some coming around for me to get to that. But again, I learned the hard way, but I learned. And I realized that you can't treat people like that and expect them to give you their best. And I realized that the most important job a leader has is taking care of their people. And so many people think, well, all these people work for me and they're going to do what I say. And that's how I started out. And in the end, I found out that no, if I want this to be successful, I work for all of them. They don't work for me. I work for them. And my job as the leader is to make sure that they feel safe in the environment, that they feel like they're contributing, that they have a voice in the company. And when I can provide that, then the best work comes from them. I'll share with you a book that I'm reading right now. It's called Turn the Ship Around. This is a workbook, but there's a book called Turn the Ship Around. And it's by this guy here, L. David Marquette. And he was the commander of a nuclear submarine. And Tom Mitchell, who was my number 2 person, who was your boss for a while. Tom was a submariner, was actually at the same base as David Marquette's ship. And Tom said, oh yeah, I know that. I knew that boat. They were terrible. This guy took over the worst performing boat in the entire Navy. And over a couple of years, he turned it around to not only the best performing boat in the Navy, but performing way above the number 2. And sometimes you get a leader where there's a cult of personality and people do great, but when they leave, that stops. Mm-hmm. And when he left, it didn't stop. It went on for years, and everybody under his command went on to high leadership positions, either in the military or even in civilian life. So it was they blew the statistics off of all of that. But what he teaches is intent-based leadership, where you implement leadership at all levels. And the idea is you empower your teams to make decisions. And instead of the boss walking around telling everybody what to do, when you've implemented this correctly, people come to the boss and say, I intend to, because they're already thinking about the solutions. And when you have a whole team of people thinking about solutions, you can do some really cool stuff. And in fact, I'll give you a quote in here that I thought was very powerful. It says, and Albert Einstein said, the significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. Okay, so that's a very powerful statement. It's a very true statement in my experience. But there's also another quote here from Captain Marquette, which is, you may be able to buy a person's back with a paycheck, position, power, or fear, but a human being's genius, passion, and loyalty and tenacious creativity are volunteered only. The world's greatest problems will be solved by passionate, unleashed volunteers. So that's the type of thinking that changed the way that I managed, that allowed the culture that you saw, which I think continued to get even better after you went on. And I don't even know that we hit the pinnacle of what it could have been. And a lot of what I'm trying to do is to teach this stuff to entrepreneurs now, so that maybe they can do it a little bit quicker than I did, and a little bit without as much pain as I ran into to learn those lessons. But that's powerful stuff. And there's one of my favorite quotes by Peter Drucker, who's a management consultant, kind of the godfather of modern management. When talking about culture and strategy, and I mean, strategy is important. I teach strategy to business owners, but Drucker's quote was that culture eats strategy for breakfast. and it's true. I mean, if you had to have one of those two things, I'll take the culture every time, because you can't execute a good strategy unless you have good culture. And what I tell, and occasionally I've had somebody throw that quote at me when I start talking about strategy and teaching it. And they go, well, according to Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I said, yeah, but what if you have the strategy and the culture?
Right.
What happens then? Some really cool stuff comes out of it when you have the strategy and you have the culture to execute it on.